25 years ago at Rye House Kart Circuit, they laughed when Anthony Hamilton said his son would become a Formula One driver. Now, seven-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton returns to that same track with a mission: to find and fund talented, young racers from diverse backgrounds who might otherwise never get the chance to chase their dreams. But as Lewis creates opportunities for a new generation, he'll face resistance from the racing establishment and confront ghosts from his own past, including someone who once laughed at that small boy from Stevenage who dared to dream too big. The engine sound filled the air as 10-year-old Lewis Hamilton gripped the steering wheel of his go-kart. The smell of fuel and rubber made him smile. This was where he belonged. 3 seconds to go, Lewis! His dad Anthony shouted from the side of the Rye House track. Rain had started to fall, making the track slippery. Most kids hated racing in the rain. Lewis loved it. Lewis looked at the other boys on the starting line. Their karts were newer. Their racing suits didn't have patches. Their helmets weren't hand-painted like his, but none of that mattered when the race started. The lights went green. Lewis pushed his foot down hard and shot forward. His small frame leaned into the first turn, feeling the kart slide just a little before gripping the track again. "That's it, Lewis! Perfect line!" Anthony yelled, running along the fence. Lewis was the only black kid racing at Rye House Kart Circuit in Hertfordshire. Some people stared. Others whispered. A few laughed when Anthony said his son would be a Formula One driver someday. "Hamiltons don't belong here," one dad had said last month, not caring if Anthony heard. "Waste of time and money." Lewis heard things too, but his dad taught him to answer on the track. And answer he did. Turn after turn, lap after lap, Lewis passed kart after kart until he was in first place. Rain fell harder now. 2 boys spun off the track, splashing through puddles. Another slowed down, too scared to push. But Lewis drove like he was born for this weather, finding grip where others couldn't. As he crossed the finish line in first place, Anthony pumped his fist in the air. "That's my boy!" he shouted. Later, as they loaded the kart into their old van, Lewis noticed how tired his dad looked. "Did you have to leave work early again, Dad?" Lewis asked, knowing the answer. Anthony nodded. "Just for an hour. I'll make it up tomorrow." He ruffled Lewis's hair. "Worth it to see that drive, though." Lewis knew his dad worked 3 jobs to pay for his karting. He worked as an IT manager during the day. At night, he took extra jobs putting up for sale signs for real estate companies. On weekends, he sometimes worked at the train station, all to buy tires, fuel, and entry fees for Lewis's racing. That night at their small house in Stevenage, Lewis helped his dad clean the kart in their tiny garage. "Dad, I heard Mr. Parker laughing when you told him I'll be in Formula One someday," Lewis said, his voice quiet. Anthony put down his wrench and looked Lewis in the eye. "Listen to me, Lewis. People will always laugh when you have big dreams, especially when you look different from what they expect." He pointed to the kart. "But every time you get in that seat, you prove them wrong. Every single time." "But Formula One costs millions of pounds," Lewis said. "And we're not rich." "We're rich in what matters," Anthony replied. "Determination, hard work, talent." He tapped Lewis on the chest. "And you've got more talent in your little finger than most have in their whole body." Lewis smiled. His dad always knew what to say. "Now help me with this chain tension," Anthony said. "We need everything perfect for tomorrow." Next morning, Lewis woke up early. His stepmother Linda was making breakfast, while his half-brother Nicholas played with toy cars on the floor. Nicholas had cerebral palsy, which made his legs weak, but he loved watching Lewis race. "Did you finish your homework?" Linda asked, putting toast on Lewis's plate. Yes, Lewis said, even though he'd rushed through it. Racing took up so much time that school sometimes felt less important. Eat up, Anthony said, walking in. We've got a big day. McLaren's sending someone to watch the juniors race today. Lewis nearly choked on his toast. McLaren? The Formula One team? Anthony nodded, trying to hide his excitement. Ron Dennis has a young drivers program. They're scouting talent. Do you think they'll notice me? Lewis asked, his heart beating faster. If you drive like you did yesterday, they'd have to be blind not to, Anthony said. But no pressure. Just drive your best. As they drove to the track, Lewis looked out the window at the houses of Stevenage. Normal houses where normal kids lived normal lives. But Lewis didn't want normal. He wanted to be the greatest racing driver in the world. At the track, more people than usual were watching. Men in team jackets stood with clipboards. Lewis felt butterflies in his stomach. Nervous? Anthony asked, helping Lewis with his helmet. A little, Lewis admitted. Good. Means you care. Anthony zipped up Lewis's race suit. Remember what we always say? Lewis nodded, and they said it, together. The car doesn't know your color, just how you drive it. As Lewis wheeled his cart to the starting line, he noticed some of the other dads pointing and whispering. The Hamiltons were different. They didn't have money, they didn't have connections. But they had each other, and that was enough. Lewis took a deep breath as he waited for the lights. Today could change everything. Today could be the first step toward proving everyone wrong. The lights went green, and Lewis Hamilton raced toward his future. 25 years later, a sleek black car pulled into the parking lot at Rye House Kart Circuit. The driver door opened, and out stepped Lewis Hamilton. No longer the small boy from Stevenage, but a 7-time Formula One world champion. Lewis stood for a moment, taking in the sight of the track where it all began. The place looked smaller than he remembered. The main building had a fresh coat of paint, and the track surface had been redone, but the layout was the same. Every corner, every straight, he could still drive them perfectly in his mind. "Sir Lewis," called a middle-aged man hurrying from the office. "We weren't expecting you until noon." Lewis smiled and shook the man's hand. "I wanted some time to just walk around before the cameras arrive, Mr. Peterson." "Please, call me Dan. I've owned this place for 15 years now. But your picture has been on our wall of fame the whole time." Dan looked at his watch. "The film crew said they'd be here in about an hour." "Perfect," Lewis said. "I'd like to just wander a bit, if that's okay." Dan nodded eagerly. "Of course. Anything you need." As Lewis walked toward the track, memories flooded back. The countless weekends, the sound of carts buzzing around the circuit, the smell of racing fuel, the taste of his mom's sandwiches eaten quickly between races. He stopped at the first corner, the scene of his first big crash when he was 11. His dad had spent a month's salary fixing the cart, never once complaining. Lewis continued walking, running his hand along the fence. He paused when he reached the spot where his father always stood, rain or shine, timing every lap with a stopwatch. "We did it, Dad," Lewis whispered to himself. "We really did it." The sound of carts brought Lewis back to the present. A Saturday morning practice session was underway. About 15 young racers zoomed around the track, their parents watching. From the sidelines, Lewis leaned against the fence, studying the drivers. Some had natural talent. Others were trying too hard. One small cart caught his eye, the driver taking perfect racing lines through the corners. A group of dads stood nearby, not noticing who was watching. "Thompson's boy has the best cart money can buy," one said. "Course he's winning." "That's racing," another replied. "You need money to go fast." Lewis frowned. After all these years, nothing had changed. The same barriers still existed, the same attitudes. He looked around at the drivers and noticed something else familiar. Almost all of them were white, just like when he was a kid. "Lewis Hamilton! Is that really you?" Lewis turned to see an older man with gray hair and a Rye House staff jacket. "Mike?" Lewis said, recognizing one of the old mechanics who used to help when his cart broke down. "You're still here?" "Where else would I be?" Mike laughed, giving Lewis a hug. "Fixing carts for the next generation of speedsters." They chatted about old times until Mike asked, "So what brings you back here? Bit different from Monaco and your private jets, isn't it?" Lewis looked out at the track. "I've been thinking a lot about how I got started, about my dad working multiple jobs, about being the only black kid out there." He paused. "And about how many talented kids never get the chance I got." Mike nodded. "Still the same story. Racing isn't cheap." "That's why I'm here," Lewis said. "I want to change that." Before Mike could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of several vans. The film crew had arrived early. For the next 2 hours, Lewis filmed segments for a documentary about his journey from Rye House to Formula One. They wanted shots of him walking the track, talking about his memories, and even sitting in a cart. "Can we get one with you in a cart, Sir Lewis?" the director asked. Lewis laughed. "I might be a bit big for these now." But he squeezed into one anyway, his knees nearly touching his chest. The cameras rolled as Lewis talked about his first race, his first win, and the day a McLaren scout spotted him. "I was lucky," Lewis said to the camera. "I had talent, but talent isn't enough. I had a dad who believed in me, who sacrificed everything. Not everyone has that." When the filming finished, Lewis noticed the kids from the practice session watching from a distance, whispering excitedly. "Would you mind saying hello to them?" Dan asked. "They're in awe." Lewis walked over to the group. Eyes widened, mouths opened. One boy was so excited he dropped his helmet. "You guys having fun out there?" Lewis asked. They nodded, too nervous to speak. "Who's fastest today?" Lewis asked with a smile. Several fingers pointed to a tall boy with expensive-looking gear. "That's Jamie," one girl said. "His dad buys him the best stuff." Lewis noticed a small boy at the back of the group, looking down at his worn racing boots. "What's your name?" Lewis asked him. "Elijah," the boy said quietly. "Elijah's really fast," the girl added, "but his cart is old." Lewis knelt down to eye level with Elijah. "You know, my first cart was second-hand. Sometimes it's not the newest cart that wins, it's the driver with the most heart." Elijah's face lit up. After signing autographs and taking photos, Lewis walked back to the main building with Dan. A thought had been growing in his mind all day. "Dan, I've been thinking about starting a program here," Lewis said. "Something to help kids from diverse backgrounds get into karting." Dan raised his eyebrows. "What kind of program?" "A racing academy. I'd fund it myself. Free equipment, coaching, entry fees, everything. For kids who couldn't otherwise afford it." That's incredibly generous," Dan stammered. "I just need a home base, somewhere special." Lewis looked around at Rye House. Somewhere like this. As they reached Lewis's car, a memory flashed through his mind. He was 8 years old, standing in the same parking lot, hearing laughter from a group of dads. "Look at them," one had said. "Do they really think a black kid from council housing is going to make it to Formula One?" More laughter, his father's, hand tightening around his. Lewis took a deep breath. "This is where they laughed at us, Dan. This is where I want to build something new." Dan extended his hand. "When do we start?" Lewis took Dan's hand and shook it firmly. How about we start right now? Let's talk inside. Back in Dan's office, Lewis paced excitedly while explaining his vision. Dan sat behind his desk, eyes wide, trying to keep up. I want to call it Hamilton Racing Dreams, Lewis said. We'll find kids with talent who couldn't normally afford to race. We'll provide everything: karts, suits, helmets, entry fees, coaching. Dan tapped his pen on a notepad. That's going to cost a fortune, Lewis. I can handle the money, Lewis replied. What I need is your track and your expertise. This place is special to me. What exactly are you picturing? Dan asked, beginning to make notes. Lewis sat down across from him. Start with maybe 5 or 6 kids, ages 10 to 12. We'll have tryouts to find raw talent. I want kids from all backgrounds, especially those underrepresented in racing. And the goal is what? To get them racing professionally someday? For some, maybe, Lewis nodded. But more than that, I want to change the face of karting. Show that this sport isn't just for one type of person. Break down those barriers I faced. Dan looked thoughtful. It's a beautiful idea, Lewis, but I should warn you about some challenges. I'm listening. We've got some pretty established racing families here. They might not like newcomers getting special treatment. There could be some pushback. Lewis smiled. I've dealt with pushback my whole career. And running a program like this takes time. You're still racing in Formula One, traveling the world. Who manages things day to day? I've thought about that, Lewis said. I want to hire a full-time program director, someone who knows karting but also understands what these kids might face. And for myself, I'll be hands-on whenever I'm in England. Dan nodded, warming to the idea. We could set aside track time specifically for your kids, maybe Sunday afternoons and Wednesday evenings? Perfect, Lewis said. And we'll need garage space to keep the karts. We can use the end bay in the main garage, Dan offered, sketching a layout on his notepad. It's smaller but separated from the others. Lewis stood up again, unable to contain his energy. I want the best coaches, people who can spot talent and develop it, people who care about more than just lap times. I might know a few people, Dan said, including some ex-racers who'd jump at the chance to work with a program backed by Lewis Hamilton. My team at Mercedes wants to help too, Lewis added. My race engineer said he'd come down to talk to the kids about data and setup, and Toto offered to have them visit the factory. Dan whistled. These kids are going to get opportunities most racers only dream about. Lewis looked out the office window at the track. A new group of karts was practicing now. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. You know, Lewis said quietly, when I was a kid racing here, there was this one day when everything changed. I was about 11. There was a scout from McLaren watching. My dad had told me, but said not to think about it. Just drive my best. And? Did you? Dan asked. I won by 12 seconds, Lewis said, smiling at the memory. Ron Dennis started supporting me not long after that. It changed my life. That's what I want to give these kids, their moment when everything changes. Dan stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Lewis. What's this? Lewis asked. Applications from families asking for financial help with racing, Dan said. We get them all the time. We do what we can, but it's never enough. Some of these kids are incredibly talented. Lewis opened the folder. Inside were letters from parents, some handwritten, explaining why their child deserved a chance to race despite limited funds. There were photos of kids standing proudly next to rental karts, beaming with joy. This is exactly why I'm doing this, Lewis said, feeling even more determined. So, When do we announce the program? Dan asked. Lewis thought for a moment. Let's move fast. Announce next week. Tryouts the week after. I'll rearrange my schedule to be here. And who designs the logo? The Kart livery? The racing suits? Lewis grinned. Leave that to me. Everything will be top quality. Dan extended his hand again. Lewis Hamilton Racing Dreams at Rye House. Has a nice ring to it. Lewis shook his hand. This is going to change lives, Dan. Yours too, I bet, Dan replied. As they walked out of the office, Lewis noticed the sky had turned purple with sunset. He paused at the fence one more time, looking at the track where his journey began. Dad sacrificed everything for me to race here, Lewis said softly. Now, it's my turn to do that for others. In his mind, Lewis could still hear the laughter of those who doubted him years ago. But now, it was being drowned out by the sound of a new dream taking shape. 2 weeks later, Lewis stood in the gymnasium of Brixton Primary School in South London. The school's head teacher had cleared the large space for Lewis's talent search event. 4 racing simulators were set up in a row, each with a racing seat, steering wheel, and pedals. We've selected 20 students to try the simulators today, the head teacher explained. All from families who couldn't normally afford karting. Lewis nodded, looking at the excited children lining up along the wall. Perfect! And they don't know I'm coming? Not a clue. We just told them it was a special sports opportunity. When the children entered the gym, their eyes went wide at the sight of Lewis Hamilton. Some gasped, others froze, a few bounced up, and down with excitement. Hello, everyone, Lewis said with a warm smile. I'm Lewis Hamilton, and I'm looking for the next generation of racing drivers. After explaining his new program at Rye House, Lewis watched as the children took turns on the simulators. Some struggled with the controls. Others drove too fast and crashed. A few showed promising skills. Then it was time for student number 17, Maya Johnson. Maya was small for her 10 years, with dark braided hair and serious brown eyes. She approached the simulator with quiet focus, while the other children chatted excitedly. Have you used one of these before, Maya? Lewis asked. Not this kind, she said softly, but I practice on the one at Angeltown Community Center every Saturday. Lewis helped her adjust the seat. Just do your best. Have fun with it. Maya placed her hands on the wheel at precisely 9 and 3 o'clock, the correct racing position. Lewis noticed immediately. When the simulation started, she didn't rush. She took her time learning the virtual track's layout on the first lap. Lewis watched her eyes. They were constantly moving, looking ahead to the next corner. By the third lap, Maya was taking perfect racing lines through every turn. She's a natural, whispered Jenny, Lewis's program coordinator. Lewis nodded, getting that familiar feeling he recognized from spotting rare talent. Maya, how did you learn to drive like that? The girl finished her final lap before answering. YouTube videos. I watch onboard cameras from races, and I study your driving the most. After all 20 students had their turns, Lewis announced that he would be inviting 5 of them to a real track test at Rye House the following weekend. Maya's name was called first. Later that afternoon, Lewis met with Maya and her mother, Diane, in the school's meeting room. Ms. Johnson, your daughter has remarkable natural ability, Lewis explained. I'd like her to come to Rye House Kart Circuit for a proper test in a real kart. Diane Johnson looked tired. Her nurse's scrub suggested she had come straight from a shift at the hospital. That's in Hertfordshire, right? She asked. I work weekends, Mr. Hamilton, and I don't have a car. We'll arrange transportation, Lewis assured her. And please, call me Lewis. I want to go, Mum, Maya said, her eyes pleading. Please, Diane looked at her daughter. "This means that much to you?" Maya nodded vigorously. "I've been dreaming about racing forever." "I didn't even know," Diane said softly. "You never mentioned it." "Because I knew we couldn't afford it," Maya replied. Louis recognized that conversation. He'd had the same one with his father, worried about asking for something that cost too much money. "Ms. Johnson," Louis said, "that's exactly why I'm starting this program. So kids like Maya don't have to give up on dreams because of money." The following Saturday, Maya and 4 other children arrived at Rye House. They stared wide-eyed at the carts prepared for them. Brand new machines in gleaming blue and purple colors with "Hamilton Racing Dreams" written on the side. "These are real racing carts," explained Mike, the mechanic Louis had known since childhood. "Just like the ones Louis started in." The children were fitted with racing suits, helmets, and gloves. Maya's equipment was slightly too big, but she didn't seem to mind. She kept running her fingers over the HRD logo on her suit, as if making sure it was real. Louis watched from the pit wall as the children took their first tentative laps. Most were nervous, driving slowly at first. Not Maya. From the moment she left the pit lane, she drove with confidence. "She's not afraid of the cart," Louis commented to Jenny. "That's rare." After 10 minutes, Maya was taking corners in a proper racing line, braking at the right points, and accelerating smoothly. While the other children were still getting comfortable, Maya was already looking for speed. During a break, Louis sat next to Maya on the pit wall. "How does it feel compared to the simulator?" he asked. "Better," Maya said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Much better. You can feel everything the cart is doing." "That's called feedback," Louis explained. "Great drivers use that feeling to go faster." "Can I go faster next time?" Maya asked eagerly. Louis laughed. "Yes, but remember, smooth is fast. Don't rush." After lunch, the children did timed laps. Maya was quickest by over 2 seconds, an enormous margin in racing. At the end of the day, Louis gathered the children and their parents. "You've all done amazingly well today," he said. "Each of you has potential. We're going to invite all 5 of you to join our program." The children cheered. Parents looked stunned, then grateful. "We'll have proper training 3 times a week," Louis continued. "All equipment provided, all costs covered. And in 3 months, if you're ready, your first real race." As the families prepared to leave, Louis noticed Maya standing alone by the track, looking out at the circuit. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, walking up beside her. "I'm trying to remember every corner," she said, "so I can practice in my head before next time." Louis smiled, recognizing himself in her words. "I used to do the same thing." "Did you?" Maya looked up at him with newfound connection. "Every night, before bed, I'd close my eyes and drive lap after lap in my mind." Maya nodded seriously. "I'm going to do that too." As they walked back to the garage, Maya asked, "Do you think I could be a real racing driver someday? Like, for my job?" Louis looked down at the determined girl beside him. In her, he saw the same fire, the same focus he had felt at her age. "Maya, I don't just think it's possible," he said. "From what I saw today, I think it's likely, if you want it badly enough." Maya's smile lit up her entire face. "I do. I really, really do." Watching her skip ahead to join her mother, Louis felt something he hadn't expected. A sense of purpose even stronger than winning championships. He was helping create a new generation of dreamers who wouldn't have to hear the laughter of doubters. This was just the beginning. The following week, Lewis arrived at Rye House for the first official training day of Hamilton Racing Dreams. All 5 children had been fitted with custom racing suits in the program's colors, purple and blue, matching Lewis's helmet design. Maya was already there, examining her kart with Mike the mechanic. 4 other children stood nearby, looking both excited and nervous. "Good morning, future champions," Lewis called, approaching the group. "Today we really get started. But first, let's all get to know each other." Lewis gathered the children in a circle and asked them to introduce themselves. "I'm Zane," said a tall, slender 12-year-old boy with dark hair. "I'm from Bradford. My dad owns a restaurant there." Lewis nodded, remembering Zane's file. His father had immigrated from Pakistan as a teenager, started as a dishwasher, and eventually opened his own small restaurant. Zane had shown great mechanical understanding during the tryouts, instantly grasping how the kart worked. "I'm Aid," said the next boy, his voice quiet, but with a slight Nigerian accent. At 11, he was stocky and strong. "From Manchester. My mom works at the hospital." Lewis knew Aid's story too. His mother was a cleaner at Manchester Royal Infirmary, raising 3 children on her own after his father returned to Nigeria. Ade had incredible reflexes, reacting faster than any of the other children during the simulator tests. "I'm Sophia," said a girl with curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. "I'm 10, and my mom is from Spain, and my dad is from Portugal. We live in Hackney." Sophia came from a family of football fans. Her father coached a local youth team. During the ICM tryouts, Sophia had shown exceptional bravery, never backing off even when the kart felt unstable. Lewis knew that fearlessness was something that couldn't be taught. The last boy was the smallest of the group. "I'm Tyler," he said. "I'm 10, from Birmingham, and my granddad used to race motorbikes." Tyler's grandfather had actually competed against Lewis in karting many years ago. Now he worked in a factory and had raised Tyler since his parents split up. Tyler had natural smoothness in the kart. His movements were never jerky or rushed. "And I'm Maya," Maya said, even though Lewis already knew her. "From Brixton. Mom's a nurse." Lewis smiled at the 5 children. They came from different places, different backgrounds, but they all shared something special: raw talent and determination. "Today we start your journey," Lewis said. "Maybe to Formula One, maybe to other racing series, or maybe just to become the best you can be. The important thing is that we're doing this together." The first training session focused on the basics: understanding racing lines, braking points, and how to sit properly in the kart. Coach Sarah, a former British karting champion, showed them exercises to develop their reactions and strength. During a break, Lewis noticed Zane sitting alone, looking worried. "Everything okay, Zane?" Lewis asked, sitting beside him. "My dad had to close the restaurant early yesterday to drive me here," Zane said. "That costs him money." "The program includes transportation costs," Lewis assured him. "We'll arrange for a driver to bring you next time." "It's not just that," Zane said. "Some people at school say I'm wasting my time. They say Pakistani kids don't become racing drivers." Lewis put his hand on Zane's shoulder. "When I started, people said black kids don't become Formula One drivers. Now I have 7 world championships." Zane looked up, his eyes bright. "Really? They said that to you?" "All the time," Lewis nodded. "Prove them wrong with your driving, not your words." Later, Lewis found Sophia helping Aid with his helmet strap. "You two getting along well?" Lewis asked. "Sophia's really nice," Aid said. "She helped me when I was nervous about the fast corner." "We made a deal," Sophia explained. "I help him be brave in the fast parts, and he helps me be patient in the slow parts." Lewis smiled. That's what teammates do, help each other get better. By lunchtime, the children were becoming a team. They sat together, sharing stories and comparing notes about the morning session. Tyler was drawing the track layout on a napkin, showing the others where he thought they could go faster. When training resumed, Maya continued to impress with her natural speed. But Lewis was careful not to single her out. Each child had unique strengths that would make them special as drivers. At the end of the day, Lewis brought the group together again. "You've all done brilliantly today," he said. "Racing isn't just about being fast. It's about working together, learning from each other, and never giving up, even when it's hard." As the children were getting ready to leave, Lewis overheard Tyler talking to Zane. "My granddad says we're making history," Tyler said. "He says no one's ever done a racing program like this before." "Do you think we'll all make it to Formula One?" Zane asked. Tyler shrugged. "Maybe not all of us, but some of us might. And even if we don't, we get to race karts for real." "How cool is that?" Lewis smiled, hearing their conversation. These children understood something important. The journey itself was valuable, regardless of the destination. As Lewis walked back to his car, Dan, the track owner, caught up with him. "They're forming a real bond already," Dan observed. Lewis nodded. "That's what I was hoping for. They need each other. This journey isn't easy." "The racing world isn't going to change overnight, Lewis," Dan said. "You know that, right?" "It doesn't have to," Lewis replied, watching the children with their families. "It just has to change enough to give these kids a fair chance." "And if it doesn't?" Dan asked. Lewis smiled with determination. "Then we'll change it ourselves, one driver at a time." 3 weeks later, word about Hamilton racing dreams had spread throughout the karting world. Lewis had arranged for professional coaches, top-quality equipment, and a structured training program for the 5 children. Today was their first official training day with the full coaching staff. Maya arrived early, her mother dropping her off before heading to her hospital shift. Maya wore her Hamilton Racing Dreams jacket proudly as she walked toward the garage. "Morning, Maya," called Mike from the kart bay. "Ready for the big day?" Maya nodded, but her stomach felt tight with nervousness. Today wasn't just practice. Today, they would be timed and evaluated. Plus, other racers from Rye House would be watching. Soon, the other 4 children arrived. Zane's father had closed his restaurant for the morning. Adie's mother had swapped shifts with a co-worker. Sophia's parents both came, taking photos of everything. Tyler arrived with his grandfather, who chatted excitedly with Mike about the old days of racing. Lewis pulled up in his car just as Coach Sarah was gathering the children. "The champion arrives," announced Sarah. "Perfect timing." Lewis gave high fives to each child before addressing the group. "Today is special," he said. "Today we start serious training. We have data engineers from Mercedes here to analyze your driving. We have professional coaches to work with each of you. But most importantly, we have you 5, the future of racing." The children's faces showed a mix of excitement and fear. Lewis recognized the look. He'd felt the same way before big races, even now as a 7-time world champion. "It's okay to be nervous," Lewis added. "That means you care. Let's channel those nerves into focus." The morning began with Sarah leading the children through warm-up exercises. Then Jim, a data engineer from Mercedes F1, explained how they would track each driver's performance. "We'll measure your braking points, racing lines, and consistency," Jim said, showing them special sensors attached to their karts. "Just like we do with Lewis in Formula One." Maya stared at the computer screens showing the track layout. This was real racing technology. the kind she'd only seen in videos. As the children prepared to go on track for their first timed session, Louis noticed Maya standing still, clutching her helmet. "Everything okay, Maya?" Louis asked quietly. "What if I'm not fast enough?" she whispered. "What if yesterday was just luck?" Louis knelt down to her eye level. "Maya, I still get that feeling sometimes, even after all these years." "You do?" Maya looked surprised. "Before every race," Louis admitted. "But here's what I learned. Those feelings are just feelings. They don't control your hands or your feet or how you drive." Maya took a deep breath. "But everyone's watching today. Focus on the track, not the people watching," Louis said. "When I was about your age, I let nerves get to me in an important race. My dad told me something I never forgot. He said, 'The cart doesn't know you're nervous. It only knows how you drive it.'" Maya smiled slightly. "That's smart." "Try this," Louis suggested. "When you put on your helmet, imagine you're putting on a superhero mask. Inside that helmet, you're not nervous, Maya. You're fearless Maya, the racing driver." Maya giggled and nodded. She pulled on her helmet with new determination. From the pit wall, Louis watched as the children began their timed laps. Zayn was smooth and precise. Ade was aggressive, but sometimes overdrove the corners. Sophia was fearless in the fast sections. Tyler had beautiful rhythm through the complex corners, but Maya remained in the garage. When her turn came, she sat in the cart, but didn't move. "She's frozen," Sarah said to Louis. Louis walked to Maya's cart and leaned down. Through her visor, he could see tears in her eyes. "I can't do it," Maya whispered. "There are so many people watching." Louis looked around. Other young racers and their parents had gathered along the fence to watch the Hamilton Racing Dreams kids. Some were smiling supportively, but others wore skeptical expressions. "Let me tell you a story," Louis said quietly. "When I was 11, I came to race at a track I'd never been to before. All the local kids laughed because my cart was old and my race suit was patched up. I was so nervous, I threw up before the race." Maya's eyes widened. My dad said, "Let your driving do the talking." And you know what happened? I won the race. Those same kids who laughed wanted to be my friend afterward. "What did you say to them?" Maya asked. Louis smiled. "Nothing. I just kept racing. Success is the best answer to doubters." Maya took a deep breath, closed her visor, and started her engine. As she pulled away, Louis gave her a thumbs up. To everyone's surprise, Maya drove the fastest lap of the day on her very first timed lap. As she crossed the line, Louis's team erupted in cheers. By lunchtime, all 5 children had completed their sessions. Parents gathered around as Jim showed them the 8E, data from each driver. "They're all showing remarkable progress," Jim explained, "especially considering how little experience they have." Some parents beamed with pride. Others looked overwhelmed by the technical information. Ade's mother kept asking if her son was safe. Zayn's father wanted to know when they would start racing for real. Maya sat quietly, studying the racing line graphs with intense concentration. After lunch, they practiced race starts and overtaking techniques. Louis worked one-on-one with each child, sharing the wisdom he'd gained over decades of racing. At the end of the day, as the children were changing out of their racing suits, Louis overheard a conversation between 2 fathers watching from outside. "The fence. Nice charity project for Hamilton," one said. "But let's be real. These kids aren't going anywhere in racing." "That little girl is pretty quick," the other admitted, "but they don't have the background for this sport. Racing's in the blood. Their kind don't have it." Louis felt his jaw tighten but kept walking. He'd heard such comments his entire career. The best response was always success, not arguments. Inside the garage, Lewis gathered the team for a final chat. "Today was just the beginning," he said. "You'll have good days and bad days. You'll face people who believe in you and people who don't. But what matters is that we believe in each other." Maya raised her hand. "Lewis, did you really get sick before a race when you were a kid?" Lewis laughed. "I sure did. Being nervous is normal. Being afraid is normal. Doing it anyway is what makes you special." As the children left with their families, Lewis stayed behind, watching them go. Despite the skepticism from some onlookers, he felt certain. These 5 children were already proving the doubters wrong, one lap at a time. As the Hamilton Racing Dreams program entered its 2nd month, the children's skills improved dramatically. Their karts, with their distinctive purple and blue colors, had become a regular sight at Rye House during their dedicated practice sessions. Lewis arrived for the Sunday morning training to find an unfamiliar atmosphere at the track. Several parents and children from other racing teams were gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. They fell silent when Lewis walked past. "Morning, Lewis," Dan greeted him at the office. "We might have a situation today." "What's going on?" Lewis asked, noticing Dan's uncomfortable expression. "Richard Parker is here with some of the other established racing families," Dan explained. "They've asked for a meeting with you." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "Richard Parker? Tom's dad?" Dan nodded. "The same. Tom's been the junior champion here for the past 2 years. Richard's, well, he's influential among the racing parents." "What does he want to meet about?" "He says it's about track time allocation, but..." Dan trailed off. "But it's really about us," Lewis finished. "About my kids getting special treatment." "You said this might happen," Dan reminded him. Lewis nodded. "Where are they?" "Waiting in the conference room." Inside the small room, 5 men and 2 women sat around a table. Lewis recognized them as parents of the most successful junior racers at Rye House. At the head of the table sat Richard Parker, a tall man with graying hair and an expensive-looking racing jacket. "Sir Lewis," Richard said, standing to shake hands, "thank you for joining us. We thought it was time we had a chat." Lewis shook his hand firmly. "Just Lewis is fine. What can I help you with?" "We'll get straight to the point," Richard said. "While we appreciate what you're trying to do with your project, we're concerned about the impact on the rest of the racing community here." A woman with blonde hair nodded. "You've been given priority track time on Wednesdays and Sundays, times that used to be open to everyone. And your kids are getting professional coaching from F1 personnel," added another father. "That creates an unfair advantage." Lewis took a seat and looked around the table. "My program takes up 4 hours of track time per week out of Rye House's full schedule. As for coaching, yes, these children are getting top-quality instruction. That's the whole point of the program." "The point of the program," Richard said, leaning forward, "seems to be giving special treatment to a select group based on criteria that have nothing to do with merit." Lewis felt his temper rising but kept his voice calm. These children were selected based on talent they showed during tryouts. If anything, they're at a disadvantage because they've had far less experience than your children. "Let's be honest," Richard continued. "This is about publicity for your brand. These kids are being used as props in a PR campaign." That stung. Lewis took a deep breath before responding. "Mr. Parker, when I was 10 years old, children like yours laughed at me for dreaming of Formula One. Parents like you told my father we didn't belong in this sport. I'm giving these kids the chance I almost didn't get." "Racing is expensive," one father said. "That's just reality. Not everyone can afford it." And that reality has kept talented kids out for generations, Lewis countered. If you're truly concerned about fairness, you should be supporting what we're doing, not fighting it. Richard's expression hardened. My son Tom has worked for years to be champion here. He's earned everything he's achieved. Now your kids show up with brand new equipment, professional coaches, and all the advantages money can buy. Where's the fairness in that? Lewis leaned forward. The unfairness was there long before my kids arrived, Mr. Parker. It was unfair when children with natural talent couldn't even try karting because of money or background. I'm just starting to level the playing field. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with complaints about noise during the Hamilton program sessions, concerns about media attention affecting other children, and questions about the long-term future of the program. When Lewis finally left the conference room, he found Coach Sarah waiting anxiously. "Everything okay?" she asked. "The kids are all here, ready to start." Lewis nodded. "Everything's fine, just the old guard feeling threatened by change." As they walked toward the track, Lewis saw Richard Parker watching his son Tom practice. 31 boy was clearly talented, taking perfect lines through the corners. Near the Hamilton Racing Dreams garage, Maya and the other children were gathered, already in their racing suits. "Lewis!" Maya called, waving excitedly. "Watch how much better. My braking is today." Lewis smiled, his frustration fading at the sight of the children's enthusiasm. This was what mattered, not the politics or the resistance from established racing families. Throughout the morning session, Lewis noticed Richard and several other parents watching their practice intently. They were evaluating, judging, looking for weaknesses. When Maya set a lap time that matched Tom Parker's best, Lewis saw Richard check his stopwatch twice, frowning. After the session, as Lewis was helping aid with his helmet strap, Richard approached. "Your girl Maya is quick," Richard said, his tone neutral. "Natural talent. All 5 of them have potential," Lewis replied. "They just needed a chance to show it." Richard studied Lewis for a moment. "You really believe this program can change racing, don't you?" "I do," Lewis said simply. "Because if someone had done this when I was 10, maybe I wouldn't have been the only black driver in Formula One for all these years." Richard seemed about to say something else, then stopped himself. "We'll see you at the regional championships next month, then, if your kids are ready." It wasn't exactly a challenge, but Lewis heard the undertone. "We'll be there," Lewis assured him, "and they'll be ready." As Richard walked away, Lewis realized this was just the beginning of the resistance they would face. The racing world didn't change easily. But watching Maya help Sophia with her racing gloves, seeing Zane explain a racing line to A-Day, and noticing Tyler studying Tom Parker's driving with serious attention, Lewis knew they were already winning the most important battle. They belonged here, and nobody's doubts could change that. 3 months into the Hamilton Racing Dreams program, the change in the children was remarkable. What had begun as nervous first laps had evolved into confident, skilled driving. Lewis watched with pride as his team of young racers practiced their starts on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. "Maya's braking later into turn 3, Coach Sarah noted, checking her stopwatch. "She's found almost 0.2 of a second just there." Lewis nodded. "She's not afraid of the kart anymore. None of them are." The progress was clear in the data. Jim from Mercedes had created charts showing each child's improvement. Maya's lap times had decreased steadily, now matching or beating many of the established junior racers at Rye House. Zane had developed an uncanny ability to set up his kart, understanding mechanical adjustments that puzzled much older racers. 80's starts were lightning fast, his reactions giving him an edge off the line. Sophia's fearlessness through high-speed corners had earned her the nickname Fearless among the coaching staff. And Tyler's smooth, consistent driving meant he rarely made mistakes. "They're ready to race," Sarah said. "Really race, not just practice." Lewis had been thinking the same thing. The regional championship was just 2 weeks away. He had initially planned to wait longer before entering his team in competitive races, but their progress had been faster than expected. During the lunch break, Lewis gathered the children in the garage. "I have a question for all of you," he said. "How would you feel about entering the regional championship in 2 weeks?" Their reactions were mixed. Maya's eyes lit up with excitement. Zayn looked thoughtful. Ade smiled nervously. Sophia pumped her fist in the air. Tyler simply nodded. "It's a big step," Lewis continued. "You'll be racing against kids who have been competing for years. It won't be easy." "Will Tom Parker be racing?" Maya asked. Lewis nodded. "Yes, he's the defending champion in your age category." "I want to race him," Maya said firmly. "Me too," added Sophia. Zayn raised his hand. "What if we're not ready? What if we embarrass ourselves?" "That's a fair question," Lewis acknowledged. "Racing isn't just about being fast. It's about being ready mentally, about handling pressure." "I'm scared," Ade admitted quietly. "But I still want to try." Lewis smiled at Ade's honesty. Being scared and doing it anyway, that's bravery. That's what racers do. After discussing more details about the championship, Lewis left the decision to the children. They voted unanimously to compete. News that the Hamilton Racing Dreams team would enter the regional championship spread quickly through the karting community. Media interest, which had already been growing, intensified. A crew from Sky Sports, F1 arrived at Rye House to film a feature about the program. "Lewis, what are your expectations for the championship?" asked the reporter. "My expectations are that these amazing young people will do their best," Lewis replied. "Whatever the results, I'm already proud of what they've achieved." "And is it true that some of the established racing families have objected to your program?" Lewis chose his words carefully. "Change is never easy in any sport. We're challenging the idea that racing is only for those who can afford it. That's bound to create some resistance." As the championship drew closer, Lewis arranged a special surprise for the team, a visit to the Mercedes F1 factory. The children's Dotissituin faces were priceless as they toured the facility, seeing how Formula One cars were built and meeting Lewis's team members. "This could be your workplace someday," Lewis told them as they stood beside his championship-winning car. Maya ran her fingers lightly over the car's steering wheel. "I'm going to drive one of these," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. The next day at practice, all 5 children drove with renewed determination. Their lap times improved again. Even Dan, the track owner, was impressed. "They're actually ready," he told Lewis. "3 months ago, I wouldn't have believed it possible." Richard Parker and some of the other racing parents watched from the pit wall. Lewis noticed them timing Maya's laps and whispering to each other. After the session, while the children were debriefing with Coach Sarah, Richard approached Lewis. "Your team has improved," he acknowledged. "Especially the girl, Maya." "They all have," Lewis corrected. Richard studied Lewis for a moment. "You're really invested in these kids, aren't you? This isn't just some publicity stunt." "It never was," Lewis said firmly. "My son Tom has been racing since he was 6, Richard continued. "I've spent thousands of pounds, countless weekends, years of effort. And now these newcomers show up with 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton as their coach." Lewis waited, sensing there was more. "It doesn't seem fair," Richard finished. "What doesn't seem fair," Lewis replied, "is that children with natural, Talent never got the chance to discover it because they were born into the wrong families or the wrong neighborhoods. Richard didn't have an answer for that. The final practice before the regional championship was their best yet. All 5 children set personal best times. Maya broke the track record for her age group. The coaching team celebrated with cake and juice in the garage afterward. As they were packing up, a local newspaper reporter arrived to take photos and interview the children. "How does it feel to be part of Hamilton Racing Dreams?" she asked Maya. "It feels like being part of history," Maya replied. "Lewis says we're changing racing forever." "And do you believe that?" Maya nodded confidently. "I do. Because when other kids like us see what we're doing, they'll know they can do it too." Later, as Lewis drove home, he reflected on Maya's words. That was exactly the point of everything he was doing, showing the next generation that motorsport could be for everyone. The regional championship wasn't just about winning trophies. It was about visibility, about representation, about changing perceptions. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Dan from Rye House. "Lewis, you need to know something," Dan said, his voice serious. "The entry list for the championship was published today. Richard Parker has filed a formal complaint with the organizers." "On what grounds?" Lewis asked, his good mood evaporating. "He's claiming your kids haven't completed the required number of practice races to qualify. He's trying to get them disqualified before they even start." Lewis gripped the steering wheel tighter. The old guard was playing dirty now. They'd moved from whispers and stares to active obstruction. "Can they do that?" Lewis asked. "I don't know," Dan admitted. "The rule book is open to interpretation. We need to prepare for a fight." Lewis set his jaw. "Then that's what they'll get." The next morning, Lewis called an emergency meeting with his team at Rye House. The children didn't know about Richard Parker's complaint yet, and Lewis wanted to handle the situation carefully. "What's our legal standing?" Lewis asked Jim from Mercedes, who had been reviewing the championship rulebook. "The rules say participants should have completed at least 3 practice races," Jim explained. "Our kids have done practice sessions but not official races against other competitors." Coach Sarah shook her head. "That rule isn't usually enforced for novice entries. It's a guideline, not a strict requirement. But someone with influence could push for strict interpretation," Dan added. Lewis paced the small office. "So, Richard, found a loophole?" "Exactly," Jim confirmed. "And the championship committee meets this afternoon to rule on his complaint." Lewis thought for a moment. "We need a different approach. Instead of fighting the complaint, let's solve the actual issue." "How?" Dan asked. "The championship is in 10 days. We hold our own practice races," Lewis said, "today and tomorrow. Invite all the Rye House juniors to participate. Make it official, with timing and everything." Dan looked skeptical. "On such short notice? And will the other racers even join?" "They will if there's something in it for them," Lewis replied. "We'll make it the Lewis Hamilton Challenge. I'll be there personally. We'll get media coverage. It'll be good preparation for everyone before the regional championship." Sarah grinned. That could actually work. Within hours, Lewis had his team, making calls and sending emails. His social media announcement about the last-minute Lewis Hamilton Challenge brought immediate attention. By lunchtime, 20 young racers from Rye House and nearby tracks had registered to participate. When the Hamilton Racing Dreams children arrived for their regular practice, Lewis gathered them in the garage. "There's been a change of plans," he explained. "We're going to hold real races today and tomorrow. You'll be competing against other racers from Rye House." "Like Tom Parker?" Maya asked immediately. Lewis nodded. "Yes, Tom will be racing." "But we've never done a real race before," Zane said, looking nervous. "That's exactly why we're doing this now," Lewis replied. "It's perfect preparation for the regional championship." He didn't mention Richard's complaint. The children didn't need that pressure. By mid-afternoon, the track was buzzing with activity. Parents and racers filled the pit area. Local media had arrived. Even a few celebrities who were friends with Lewis showed up to support the event. Richard Parker appeared, with Tom looking surprised at the turnout. He approached Lewis at the timing wall. "Quite the spectacle you've arranged," Richard commented. "Just giving the kids some race experience," Lewis replied casually. "Good for everyone's preparation." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You heard about my safety concern then?" "Safety concern?" Lewis repeated, keeping his tone neutral. "I thought it was about qualifying practice races." Richard had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "It's about ensuring all competitors are properly prepared for their own safety." "Well, that won't be an issue after today and tomorrow," Lewis said with a smile. "Everyone will have plenty of racing experience." As the first practice session began, Lewis noticed how nervous his team looked in their karts. They had become confident in practice, but actual racing against competitors was different. "Just like we practiced," Lewis reminded them before they went out. "Focus on your driving, not on the other racers." The first heat races were rough for the Hamilton Racing Dreams team. Aide spun out trying to defend his position. Sophia was too cautious at the start and lost several places. Zane got caught in traffic and couldn't find a way through. Tyler drove steadily but lacked aggression. Maya was the only one who seemed comfortable, finishing third behind Tom Parker and another experienced racer. Between heats, Lewis gathered his disappointed team. "That was your first real race," he said. "No one expects perfection right away." "Tom was so much faster," Aide said, looking dejected. "He's been racing for years," Lewis reminded them. "You've been racing for 3 months. But you know what? You all belong on that track just as much as he does." For the second heat, Lewis gave each child specific goals. Not positions, but focuses. For Aide, it was clean starts. For Sophia, it was being brave in overtaking. For Zane, it was finding gaps in traffic. For Tyler, it was defending his position. For Maya, it was consistent lap times. The improvement was immediate. All 5 drove with more purpose and confidence. Maya finished second, closer to Tom. The others all improved their positions. By the end of the day, Lewis could see the transformation. His team was beginning to understand real racing. The races, strategy, the pressure, the split-second decisions. As everyone was packing up, Richard approached Lewis again. "Your Maya has real talent," he admitted. "They all showed improvement today." "They're quick learners," Lewis said. Richard hesitated before adding, "I've withdrawn my complaint to the championship committee. After seeing them race today, I believe they've earned their place." Lewis simply nodded, not showing his relief. "See you tomorrow for day 2 then." That evening, as Lewis was leaving, Maya ran up to him. "Lewis, did you see? I almost caught Tom in the final heat." "I saw," Lewis smiled. "You drove brilliantly." "Tomorrow, I'm going to beat him," Maya said with determination. Lewis put his hand on her shoulder. "Maya, whether you beat Tom or not doesn't matter yet. What matters is that you're learning with every lap. The regional championship is the real target." Maya looked up at him with serious eyes. "But I'm going to beat him anyway." Lewis couldn't help but laugh. He had said the exact same thing to his father once, with the same unshakable confidence. "You know what, Maya? I believe you will." The morning of the Regional Junior Championships arrived with gray skies threatening rain. Lewis arrived at Rye House early to find Dan and the mechanics already preparing the Hamilton Racing Dreams karts. "Morning, Lewis," Dan called. "Hope you brought an umbrella. Weather report says rain by midday." Lewis smiled. "Rain might be our secret weapon. My kids have practiced in wet conditions. Maya's especially good in the rain." The two-day Lewis Hamilton challenge had been a huge success. Not only had it given the Hamilton Racing Dreams team valuable racing experience, but it had also generated positive media coverage and won over some of the skeptical racing families. The children had improved dramatically on the second day, with Maya actually beating Tom Parker in one heat race. Now came the real test, the regional championship, with over 50 young racers from across the southeast of England competing, in different age categories. Lewis checked his watch. "The team should be arriving soon. Let's go through the schedule one more time." As Dan outlined the day's program, Lewis's phone buzzed with a text from Diane, Maya's mother. "Running late. Hospital emergency. We'll try to find someone to bring Maya." Lewis frowned. He knew how important it was for Maya to have her mother there on her first big race day. Before he could respond, Mike the mechanic called from the garage. "Lewis, we've got a problem with Adie's cart." Lewis hurried over to find Mike examining Adie's engine. "What's wrong?" "Fuel pump issue," Mike explained. "Must have developed after yesterday's final check. We have spares, but it'll take time to replace." "How long?" Lewis asked. "At least an hour, maybe more." Lewis checked the schedule again. Practice sessions began in 45 minutes, with qualifying 2 hours later. "Do what you can," Lewis told Mike. "I'll let Aid know he might miss some practice." Outside, the sky darkened as more clouds rolled in. Lewis heard the rumble of distant thunder just as the first families began arriving. Sophia and her parents came first, followed by Tyler with his grandfather. Zayn arrived with his father, who looked tired after closing his restaurant late the previous night. Aid and his mother came next, both looking nervous but excited. "Where's Maya?" Sophia asked, looking around. "She's running late," Lewis explained. Her mother had an emergency at the hospital. The children gathered in the Hamilton Racing Dreams garage, now decorated with team banners and photos from their training sessions. Lewis had arranged for proper racing uniforms, and they looked professional in their matching suits. "We have a few challenges this morning," Lewis announced. "Aid, there's an issue with your cart that Mike is fixing. You might miss the first practice session." Adie's face fell. "And Maya is running late," Lewis continued, "but we adapt and overcome. That's what racing is about." As the team prepared for practice, Lewis received another text from Diane. "Can't find anyone. Maya devastated. So sorry." Lewis immediately called a taxi service and sent one to Maya's address. Then he gathered the team again. "Change of plans. I'm going to pick up Maya. Coach Sarah will handle the first practice session. Aid, by the time I get back, your cart should be ready." Lewis drove quickly to Brixton, finding Maya sitting on the 2 steps outside her apartment building, already in her racing suit, trying not to cry. "Lewis!" she exclaimed as his car pulled up. "I thought I'd miss everything." "Not a chance," Lewis said, helping her with her helmet bag. "Your mom texted me. Is she okay?" Maya nodded. "Emergency surgery at the hospital. She tried to find our neighbor to drive me, but no one was home." As they drove back to Rye House, fat raindrops began hitting the windshield. "It's raining," Maya noted, looking worried. "You're good in the rain," Lewis reminded her. "Remember your fastest lap last week was in wet conditions." When they arrived back at the track, the rain was falling steadily. Other teams were scrambling to adjust their carts for wet weather, but the Hamilton Racing Dreams mechanics had prepared in advance, having wet weather setups ready to go. Lewis found the rest of his team in the garage. Aid was still cartsless. as Mike worked frantically on his engine. "How's it going?" Lewis asked. Mike wiped his forehead. "Almost there. But we've got another problem now. The rain has caused a small leak in the garage roof. Water's dripping right where we need to work. Can we move the cart?" "Not easily. We've got everything laid out for the repair." Lewis grabbed a tarpaulin from the storage area and helped Mike create a makeshift shelter over the work area. Together, with 2 other mechanics, they managed to complete the repair just in time for the qualifying session. But the problems weren't over. As the children lined up for qualifying, a race official approached Lewis. "Sir Lewis, there's an issue with Sophia's registration. Her medical form is missing a signature." Lewis checked the form. The doctor had signed it, but Sophia's father had forgotten his signature on one page. "Her father's right there," Lewis pointed out. "He can sign it now." "Rules say all forms must be completed 24 hours before the event," the official said stiffly. Lewis recognized the official as one of Richard Parker's friends. This was another attempt to create obstacles. "Let me speak to the chief steward," Lewis said firmly. After a brief but intense discussion with the chief steward, who was familiar with Lewis from Formula One events, the issue was resolved. Sophia's father signed the form, and she was allowed to qualify. The qualifying session began on a track now thoroughly wet from the rain. Many drivers were cautious, unused to the slippery conditions, but the Hamilton Racing Dreams team had trained for this. Maya, especially, looked comfortable, sliding her cart perfectly through the corners. When qualifying ended, the results brought mixed emotions. Maya had qualified second in her class, just behind Tom Parker. Zane was 8th, Tyler 11th. Sophia, 14th, and Aid, after missing practice, qualified 17th out of 20 in his class. "Don't worry about your position," Lewis told Aid, who looked disappointed. "The races are what count, not qualifying. And you've got 3 races to move forward." As the teams prepared for the first race, the rain intensified. Race officials considered postponing, but eventually decided to proceed with caution. Several nervous parents withdrew their children from the competition, unwilling to let them race in dangerous conditions. Lewis gathered his team for a final pep talk. "This is what we've prepared for," he told them. "Most of these kids have never raced in serious rain. You have. Trust your training. Be smooth. Be patient. And remember, you all deserve to be here." As the children put on their helmets, Lewis noticed Richard Parker watching from nearby. To Lewis's surprise, Richard approached. "Quite the morning of challenges," Richard commented. "Your team has handled them well." Lewis nodded, uncertain of Richard's tone. "The rain makes things interesting," Richard continued. "Tom's never been strong in wet conditions." Was that a hint of concern in Richard's voice? Before Lewis could respond, the race officials called the first group of racers to the grid. Tyler and Sophia were in the first race, both looking small but determined as they walked to their carts. The rain continued to fall as engines started and the formation lap began. Lewis stood at the pit wall, rain soaking through his team jacket. Despite all the morning's problems, his team was ready to race. Whatever happened next, they had already overcome so much just to reach the starting line. The red lights went out. The race was on. 20 carts surged forward as the lights went out, sending rooster tails of spray into the air. From the pit wall, Lewis could barely make out Sophia and Tyler's carts in the middle of the pack. The rain was coming down harder, now making visibility poor for everyone. "They've started clean," Coach Sarah said, watching through binoculars. "Sophia's holding her position. Tyler's moved up one place already." Lewis nodded, his heart racing almost as fast as the carts on the track. This was their first real competition. the moment of truth for everything they'd been working toward. By the third lap, Tyler had gained another position, looking comfortable in the wet conditions. Sophia was being more cautious, but maintaining her place in the field. Lewis watched their lines through the corners, pleased to see them applying what they'd practiced. When the checkered flag waved after 15 intense laps, Tyler had finished 9th, gaining 2 positions from his starting place. Sophia crossed the line in 13th, 1 place better than her qualifying position. Both children returned to the garage with wide smiles despite being soaked from the rain. "I passed 2 karts," Tyler exclaimed, pulling off his helmet. "On the same lap." "You both did brilliantly," Lewis said, helping Sophia with her wet gloves. "First real race in terrible conditions, and you both moved forward. That's a huge achievement." Next, up were Zane and Adi in the intermediate class. Their race would be slightly longer at 20 laps. Zane looked focused as he walked to his cart, but Adi seemed nervous after his troubled morning. "Just concentrate on clean laps," Lewis reminded. "Ade, don't worry about position yet." As their race began, Lewis could see Zane making smart moves, picking careful lines through corners where others were sliding wide. By mid-race, he had moved up to 6th place, showing remarkable racecraft for someone so new to competition. Adi had a rougher start, dropping 2 positions early on. But instead of getting discouraged, he settled into a rhythm and began to find his confidence. Lap by lap, he caught and passed the karts ahead, climbing back to his starting position and then gaining 2 more places. When they returned to the pits, both boys were buzzing with excitement despite the continuing downpour. "Did you see that pass I made at turn 4? Zane asked, his eyes bright. "Just like you showed me, Lewis. Wait for them to make a mistake in the rain, then pounce." "And I kept remembering what you said about smooth inputs in the wet," Ade added, demonstrating with his hands how he'd controlled the cart. Lewis couldn't help but smile. They weren't just driving, they were thinking like racers now. The final race of the morning was the advanced junior class, featuring Maya and Tom Parker among the 20 most experienced young racers at the championship. Despite being newcomers, Maya's natural talent had earned her a front-row starting position. As she walked to the grid, Lewis saw her scanning the small crowd of spectators, still hoping her mother might appear. The disappointment on her face when she didn't see Diane was clear even through her rain-spattered visor. Lewis approached her before she got into the cart. "Maya, I know you wish your mom was here," he said quietly. "But every lap you drive today, she's going to hear about later. Make them laps she'll be proud of." Maya nodded, her focus returning. "I'll make them good ones." The advanced junior race was the feature event of the morning, and despite the weather, spectators huddled under umbrellas along the fence. Lewis spotted Richard Parker on the pit wall opposite, stopwatch in hand, looking intently at the starting grid where his son sat in pole position with Maya alongside. When the lights went out, Tom got a perfect start, pulling ahead into the first corner. Maya slotted in behind him, fending off a challenge from the third-place starter. For the first 5 laps, Tom pulled away slightly, his experience showing in the difficult conditions. But then, something changed. As the rain intensified, further, Maya began to close the gap. Her lines became smoother, her braking later, but still controlled. By lap 10, she was right behind Tom, looking for a way past. "She's faster in the wet sections," Sarah observed, "but he's quicker out of the hairpin." Lewis watched intently as Maya tried different lines, testing Tom's defenses. The rest of the field was falling behind as the 2 leaders pushed each other to faster lap times despite the worsening weather. On lap 15, Maya made her move, diving to the inside at the end of the main straight. For a moment, it looked like she had the position, but Tom defended firmly, forcing her to back off. 2 laps later, she tried again at a different corner, this time around the outside. The 2 karts ran side by side through the bend, wheels almost touching. Tom emerged still, just ahead. "She's not giving up," Lewis said with pride, remembering his own battles as a young racer. With just 3 laps remaining, the track was now extremely wet, with small puddles forming on some corners. Most drivers were being extra cautious, but Maya continued to push, still searching for a way past Tom. Then, entering the final lap, Tom's kart hit a puddle at the fastest part of the circuit. For a split second, his kart slid sideways. It was the tiniest of mistakes, but in racing, that's all it takes. Maya reacted instantly, steering to the inside and pulling alongside. Side by side, they raced down the back straight, neither willing to yield. Into the final corner they went, still together, both taking different lines through the bend. Tom's line was tighter, but slower. Maya's was wider, but carried more speed. As they exited the corner and sprinted toward the finish line, Maya's extra momentum pushed her kart ahead by inches. The checkered flag waved as they crossed the line, Maya just 0.067 seconds in front. She had done it, beaten the reigning champion in her first real race. The Hamilton Racing Dreams team erupted in cheers from the pit wall. Maya completed her cool-down lap, one hand raised in victory. When she returned to the pits, the entire team was waiting, surrounding her with hugs, despite the pouring rain. As Maya removed her helmet, Lewis saw tears mixing with raindrops on her face. But they were tears of joy, the pure emotion of a dream beginning to come true. From across the pit lane, Lewis noticed Richard Parker looking their way. For a moment, their eyes met. Lewis expected to see anger or resentment, but instead, Richard gave a small, acknowledging nod. Something had changed today. On a rainy track in Hertfordshire, barriers were beginning to fall. 1 week after the regional championship, Lewis invited everyone connected with Hamilton Racing Dreams to gather at Rye House. The children and their families arrived to find the track decorated with banners and a small stage set up near the pit lane. Maya ran to Lewis as soon as she arrived, her mother, Diane, walking behind her with a proud smile. "Lewis, did you see the article about our team in Autosport magazine?" Maya asked excitedly. Lewis nodded. "I did. You're getting famous already." The regional championship had been a stunning success for the team. Maya's victory over Tom Parker had made headlines in racing publications. Zane had finished 6th in his class, Tyler 9th, Sophia 13th, and Aide, after his troubled start, had climbed to 14th. All had exceeded expectations for racers with only 3 months of experience. As more people arrived, Lewis noticed how different the atmosphere was compared to that first day months ago. The Hamilton Racing Dreams children mingled confidently with other young racers from Rye House. Parents who had once been skeptical now chatted with the program's families. Dan, the track owner, approached Lewis with a broad smile. "Quite the turnout. Word spread about what you've accomplished here." Lewis looked around at the crowd, which had grown larger than expected. Several Formula One personalities had turned up, including Toto Wolff from Mercedes. Journalists from major publications were in attendance. Even a few celebrities who supported diversity in sports had made appearances. "I didn't expect all this attention," Lewis admitted. "You've started something important," Dan replied. "People want to be part of it." Lewis had arranged this gathering to announce the future of Hamilton Racing Dreams. After the success of the first group, he had big plans to expand the program. As everyone took their seats, Lewis stepped onto the small stage. A hush fell over the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," Lewis began. 3 months ago, we started Hamilton Racing Dreams with 5 amazing young people who had never raced before. Last week, they competed in the regional championship against racers with years of experience. And they didn't just compete, they excelled. Applause broke out, particularly loud from the families of the 5 children. Today, I'm excited to announce that Hamilton Racing Dreams is expanding, Lewis continued. Starting next month, we'll be opening programs at 5 more tracks across the country, giving opportunities to 50 more young racers from diverse backgrounds. The announcement was met with cheers and applause. We've secured funding and partnerships with several Formula One teams, not just Mercedes. Williams, McLaren, and Alpine will all be supporting young drivers in our program. And I'm pleased to announce that each of our original 5 racers will receive full sponsorship for next season's National Karting Championship. Maya's mouth dropped open in shock. The other children looked equally stunned as they realized what this meant. They would be racing at the highest level for their age group across the entire country. After outlining more details of the expansion, Lewis invited the 5 children to join him on stage. They stood proudly beside him, still amazed by the news they'd just heard. These 5 young racers have proven that talent exists everywhere, if only given the chance to shine, Lewis said. They are just the beginning. When the formal presentation ended, people mingled and chatted excitedly about the program's future. Lewis was speaking with Toto Wolff when he noticed Richard Parker standing alone, watching the celebrations. Lewis excused himself and walked over to Richard. "Thank you for coming today," Lewis said. Richard nodded. "Impressive announcement. You're really committed to this program." "It's important to me," Lewis replied. "Racing gave me so much. I want others to have that chance." Richard seemed to be struggling with something he wanted to say. Finally, he spoke in a quieter voice. "Lewis, could we talk privately for a moment?" Surprised, Lewis led Richard to the quiet of the track office. Richard paced for a moment before speaking. "I want to offer my help with your program," he said, unexpectedly. "I've been in karting for 15 years. I know everyone, every track, every competition. I could be useful as you expand." Lewis studied Richard carefully. "That's a generous offer, especially considering how you felt about the program initially." Richard looked down. "Yes, well, seeing those kids race last week, it made me rethink some things." "What changed?" Lewis asked. Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice different now, almost vulnerable. "Lewis, I was there 25 years ago, at this very track." Lewis looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I was one of them," Richard said quietly. "One of the dads who laughed when your father said you'd be a Formula One driver someday." The revelation hit Lewis like a physical blow. He stared at Richard, momentarily speechless. "I didn't have a son then," Richard continued. "I was helping my nephew race. But I remember your dad's determined face. I remember the patched-up race suit you wore. And yes, I remember laughing with the others, saying it would never happen." Lewis found his voice. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I was wrong," Richard said simply. "Not just about you, but about what's possible in this sport. Watching Maya race against Tom, seeing her pure talent, it made me realize I'm still making the same mistake I made 25 years ago, still limiting who I think belongs in racing." Lewis took a deep breath, processing this unexpected confession. "I can't change what I did back then," Richard added, "but I can help now, if you'll let me." Before Lewis could respond, the office door opened slightly, and Maya peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Mom says we need to leave soon for her shift." "Come in, Maya," Lewis said. "There's someone I'd like you to properly meet. This is Mr. Parker, Tom's dad. He's offering to help coach our program as we expand." Maya looked surprised but extended her hand politely. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Parker. Your son is really fast." Richard shook her hand. "So are you, Maya. That last lap last week was brilliant. Driving!" Maya beamed at the compliment. "I'm going to be even faster next race." "I believe you will," Richard said, echoing Lewis's words from weeks earlier. After Maya left, Lewis turned back to Richard. The track where they laughed. It became the track where everything changed. For me, for these kids, and maybe for racing itself. Richard nodded. "So, do you accept my offer to help?" Lewis extended his hand. "Welcome to Hamilton Racing Dreams, Richard. The past is the past. What matters is what we build now." As they walked back outside, Lewis saw Maya standing with the other children, all talking animatedly about future races and championships. Maya looked up, caught Lewis's eye, and asked the question he'd been waiting for since the day they met. "Lewis, do you think I can be like you someday?" Lewis smiled, his journey coming full circle in that moment. "No, Maya," he answered. "I think you'll be even better. Thanks for joining me till the end. Let me know in the comments from where you are tuning in. Drop your city and country name in the comments. Also make sure to subscribe to this channel if you love Lewis Hamilton. See you in the next one.